Hey, everybody. Hope that everybody's doing well and staying safe and staying healthy. Um, it's hard to believe, but we're already in week 9, and that's basically halfway through the semester, more than half. Of course, you know that well. I'm sure many of you have had midterms and things like that. Um, I bring that up because obviously we're heading into writing our workshop draft of SA2. So today's lecture or video workshop really is going to sort of discuss how to develop subclaims and a central claim and analysis paragraphs for um, um, our paper, our WD2 on our Iconoclast figures. Obviously there's been some great discussion and exchanges with our discussion boards and the M2 invention post discussions in particular. So I'm looking forward to us starting to formulate these ideas in relation to a central claim and subclaims. So that said, before I get to that though, I mentioned that we're already halfway through the semester, and I know there can be some fear like, oh my gosh, my grade is not as high or as low or whatever as I want it to be. And the thing that's important to keep in mind, no matter where your grade is at right now, is that we have a lot of our grades still remaining to be decided. I don't have the exact number, but technically we've finished a module and a half. And the most important assignment of this module course is the revised draft. So that first revised draft was 10% of our grade. I would say that so far we've probably had 35% of our grade decided, and that's on purpose. This class is designed for us to develop and build our ideas regarding central claim development, organization, subclaims, all that stuff, analysis, clarity of prose, all those things as we go from module to module. So you'll notice that the revised drafts are weighted progressively, right? So that first revised drafts, the RD1, was our least heavily weighted draft, while our RD3, which is a ways off, will be our most heavily weighted. We also have our video essay assignment. So it's not really the time to panic. I mean, obviously, you want to keep up with all the work and get as many of these smaller sort of homework points as you can. And just keep in mind that we have a lot of grade and a lot of writing ahead of us. So it's important to stay energized and stay focused, which those things can be difficult enough in what is already a difficult semester. So it being the case that we're headed into the workshop draft of SA2, I want to spend the rest of the time here talking specifically about central claims in relation to our Iconoclast, subclaims, and analysis organization. So let me share my screen here. One second. Okay, so one thing that I think it's valuable to do, since we're going to talk about central claims, obviously the big difference when we go into a workshop draft is we're taking all that work that we've done, in discussion boards, and if you did an M2 invention post for this module, we're doing all that work and all that conversation. We're taking all that work and sort of thinking about how we can start forming it into a central claim and subclaim driven analysis and argument. So it's important to keep in mind that those things aren't any different, right? In many ways, we're doing the same thing we did with our first essay, right? Or introduction, central claim, subclaims. But obviously, instead of analyzing and making an argument about a non-traditional narrative, we are now making an analysis and argument of a certain iconoclast figure, whoever we have chosen to be that. So as far as the structures we're dealing with and the things we want to do in terms of how to organize our analysis paragraphs, our introduction, our central claim, our subclaims, those things are the same, right? That's the genre of writing. That critical analysis and argument is the genre of writing we're dealing with. However, obviously our focus, our subject matter is a little bit different in the fact that we're writing about an iconoclast figure. So I think any times that we're going to sort of be talking about central claims, subclaims, it's good to sort of refresh our minds toward the sort of overall task. And I'm going to actually, sorry, I didn't do this sooner, but let me turn on captions here. So I think it's good to refresh our mind to the overall task of the assignment. So I'm going to just bring right up here the direct lines from the M2 overview. right? The M2 Iconoclast overview that gives us the kind of prompt that is the prompt for our essay. So for our second module, M2 Iconoclast, we will select an iconoclast figure and analyze how specific aspects, actions, or creations of your selected iconoclast have an impact on a social issue or issues of their time, making an argument about what you see as the larger significance of this impact for society. So once again, like I said, what are we trying to do here? We're up to the same thing. We're making an analysis and we're making an argument, right? Hence argumentative analysis. So the analysis is how specific aspects, actions, or creations of my iconoclast impact a social issue. And then my argument is going to be about what you see as the larger significance of this impact for society. So again, not unlike with the selected narrative, but obviously the focus is different. Now, as we know by now, as far as what corresponds to analysis, that's our subclaims, right? So each of our support paragraphs wants to start with a subclaim, just like in our last essay. And each of those subclaims should have, or should talk about how different elements of your iconoclast have different effects and consequences. So I'm probably going to have a different element in every single one of my subclaims, and I'm going to have a different analytical point. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. The argument, of course, is the central claim is based around your argument, which is really going to establish the larger significance of your iconoclast impact on the social issue. The larger significance isn't the only thing that the central claim does, but as far as like the overall argument, that's really what is being addressed, right? You are saying, like we did before, in some sense, kind of what is the impact or message of your iconoclast? What is the consequence of that? And what is the larger significance of that? So I want to take both of these things and start to develop them or go into them with a little bit more kind of a step-by-step process as we do, and to better, give us some ideas about writing process, right? What are the ways in which we can develop both subclaims and central claims for this new paper. So let's for now stick with analysis, right? So the analysis, like I said, we're talking about subclaims here. And again, we're going to probably want, well, when we get to the RD2, we're going to want at least 3 probably subclaim driven analysis paragraphs, maybe 4. So in each of those subclaims, we want to have an element and an analytical point. So the element is a specific aspect of your iconoclast, something of, some characteristic of them, or something they create, or something they do, aspects, actions, or creations of the language, anything that obviously they are sort of involved in, or they create, or that they are, that has, that is distinguishable from other things. And then we want to say also in each subclaim, have an analytical point. And an analytical point is not just what is the effect of the element, but also what is the consequence of that element on the social issue. So let's get into some examples here, because I think that stuff can be a little, it changes obviously as we move from, non-traditional narratives into iconoclast figures. These things are going to look a little different. However, I think there's a value if we go back to, just for a second, our first module on narrative futures and take a look at some of the subclaims from our revised drafts. And I think we can sort of pull out a few lessons that are really important from those subclaims. So in the context of our first essay, whereas the elements were a specific aspect of the narrative, of the non-traditional narrative, the analytical point, again, was the effect and consequence of the element on the audience, right? So here's one subclaim. I believe there are quite a few things that stand out in the bigger picture. He was talking about Little Baby's The Bigger Picture, the song and music video as a kind of non-traditional narrative. He was basically talking about how police brutality against Black men and women needs to come to an end. Now, one thing you'll notice with this subclaim, again, we're looking for that element, we're looking for that analytical point. One thing you'll notice here is that the element isn't very specific. In fact, they sort of say there's quite a few things that stand out. And then they say he was basically talking about police brutality against Black women and men and women that needs to come to an end. It's very broad, right? We want to try and be much more specific with a subclaim. In fact, this statement reads more like if anything, a central claim, but it would obviously need much more work for a central claim, but it's not focused enough in terms of being a subclaim, right? The subclaim is really to tell your readers at the start of a paragraph, what am I going to focus in on this paragraph? An element of my iconoclast, in the case of our new essay, and what is the point I'm going to make? So that's something we want to make sure that we do, is that our element in each of our subclaims is specific. So here's another one. Throughout the show, the main character complains that he does not want to be alive and he feels as though he is alone. So here we have a sense of a clear element, right? Focusing in on the main character, as well as sort of a part of that character, the way in which the character complains that they don't want to be alive and feel that they're alone. Now, we want to make sure also that we have strong analytical points and that our analytical points are interpretive. So while we have a more specific element in the subclaim, notice that it's not really telling us what the effect is of that character's wanting, not wanting to be alive and wanting feeling as though he's alone. We don't have a sense of the effect or consequence of that. Why is that? What does that teach us about the social issue? I think in this case, it was about mental health issues. What do we learn from that? How does this affect the audience, right? There was a time that I remember when I did not know pain, when I believed in forever and everything would stay the same, unquote. These lines of the poem connect to the audience by showing there's a point in our lives when you feel like nothing can go wrong. So the other thing we want to sort of keep in mind is that we want to avoid using evidence as the element. So bringing in the direct sort of lyric or the direct line of poetry actually is problematic for a couple of reasons. One is it puts this outside quote, if you will, or it puts a direct quote, I should say, from the primary source right at the start of the subclaim. And it sort of is very wonky in that way. And the other thing it does is it takes what should be in your evidence and puts it in the subclaim. You want to save the quote or the quoted line or whatever, you want to save the details of evidence and examples for the body of the support paragraph. That's where you get into the evidence and examples, and we'll look at that in just a second. The other thing is that it limits you to only talking about that line. Now, that can be fine. You can probably get a lot of analysis out of a line like this. However, to be more concise and more direct with the subclaim, for the subclaim to be clear and to make it so that your evidence stays in the body of your support paragraph, I would just come up with an element that's something more specific, like, imagery of or like lines addressing the innocence of childhood, or lines, lines that strike a hopeful tone. So I'm coming up with some sort of phrase that's going to help me specify what the element is. And the value of that is, one, it allows me to put the evidence down where it belongs in the body of the support paragraph. But number two, I could also look for other lines that are about the innocence of childhood, or I could look for other lines that are about sort of have this kind of hopeful vibe to them, or whatever it might be, right? These lines of the poem connect to the audience by showing there's a point in our lives when you feel like nothing go wrong. Again, we want to make sure there's a sense of consequence. So we do have some sort of sense of effect here, in the sense that like it makes the audience feel this way, showing them there's a point in our lives when nothing go wrong. But why does that matter? Again, what's the consequence of this in terms of the social issue? So that element, effect, consequence, right? The effect and consequence being the part of the analytical point. Those are things that we want to keep in mind as we move into our next essay. So with the Iconoclast paper, it's obviously, rather than a specific aspect of your non-traditional narrative, we're thinking about a specific aspect of your iconoclast. And so I wanted to bring up sort of the development of a subclaim from a paper from a separate semester that was a similar iconoclast paper. And this person was writing about Gandhi as an iconoclast. And so they decided they wanted, one of the things that Gandhi did was he boycotted foreign goods and led sort of a nationwide boycott of foreign goods. So that was the element. So Gandhi boycotted foreign goods. Now, obviously the element all by itself is not enough. In fact, that element could be a little bit more specific, right? So and again, this is coming through processes of revision. So Gandhi became Swadeshi and boycotted foreign goods, especially those of Great Britain. So notice that they built up the subclaim a little bit here by adding in some more detail, being more specific with that subclaim, but they still don't have a sense of an analytical point in terms of effect and consequence. So what was the effect of this boycott? What was the consequence of that? We don't have that quite yet. So they develop it further. Gandhi became Swadeshi and boycotted foreign goods, especially those of Great Britain, inspiring the creativity of Indian workers. Now, so since we're talking about an iconoclast figure who's having an effect on society, rather than a non-traditional narrative that's having first an effect on the audience of that non-traditional narrative and then a larger social impact, it's going to be a little bit different in terms of the effect. The effect is about how did that thing that the iconoclast did affect the people who they were supposed to affect. So Gandhi became Swadeshi and boycotted foreign goods, especially those who were inspiring the creativity of Indian workers. So Gandhi, obviously, Indian himself, was leading the Indian people in a kind of nationalist movement. So we have a sense of an effect. What was this effect of becoming Swadeshi and boycotting foreign goods? Well, it inspired the creativity of Indian workers. Okay, well, what's the consequence of that in terms of the social issue that you're arguing about? And they developed a little bit further. Gandhi became Swadeshi and boycotted foreign goods, especially those of Great Britain, inspiring the creativity of Indian workers and bringing about economic independence. So we have a sense of consequence there, and the subclaim is more full. Now, the value of this is obviously that I have a lot to sort of write about now. Obviously, I'm going to want to detail the way in which the boycotting happened, what specifically was boycotted, but I'm also going to bring up I want to address these issues of inspiring the creativity of Indian workers. I want to talk about this notion of economic independence. One of the questions or one of the concerns, or a few, were a lot about how to avoid repetition and how to get more depth and detail, how to fill out your support paragraphs, how to get to that word minimum. A lot of it has to do with how detailed specific you are with your subclaims, right? So having those distinct elements and analytical points are key, but they're also really useful for you as a writer, because now, in the next paragraph, they're not going to be writing about the boycott. They're going to be writing about some other elements of their iconoclast, and they're going to be talking about some other effect and some other consequence. Yes, it's all going to tie back to the same larger argument, right? The central claim. But the value of the subclaims, and this is, I think, really where, college level writing departs from high school writing, and we talked about this last module, is with the subclaims. You're getting much more, it's almost like each paragraph is almost its own miniature sort of argument. Obviously, it's an analysis, but we're having these much more in-depth analyses and distinct analyses in each of our support paragraphs that are adding up to the larger argument. So on that note, let's take a look at analysis organization, right? How do we put this together? What should our support paragraphs be doing? So I know this is a big wall of text here. Let me get my image of my face out of the way here. So I know this is a big wall of text here, but this is a support paragraph from that same paper. In fact, it's using that subclaim. So I obviously had to break the paragraph up into two sort of columns here so it fit on the slide. So I hope that isn't too strange seeming. But you also notice that I've color coded this. This is an analysis paragraph, support paragraph. I've color coded it to show you how much of the paragraph is staying focused on the subclaim, right? It should, the vast majority of your paragraph should be talking about the things that you set up in your subclaim. So Gandhi became Swadeshi and boycotted foreign goods, especially those of Great Britain, inspiring creativity in Indian workers and bringing about economic independence. Boom, subclaim straight out. As a reader, I know exactly what they're going to focus in on, the boycotting and Swadeshi, whatever that is. I don't even know what that is yet, but that's okay because they explain it in the very next line. But I know it's going to talk about the boycotting and it's going to bring up notions about creativity and economic independence. So Swadeshi simply means buy Indian. During early 20th century, foreign products were cheaper than local products in India, forcing local businesses to close down and debt increased. To decrease dependency on foreign products and increase demand of local products and make people creative, Gandhi urged a boycott of British goods, liquor stores, and cloth. Sorry, read that poorly. The purpose of the boycott was to punish Britain by imposing monetary loss. As Jones argues, quote, Gandhi's charisma allowed him to motivate millions of Indians at a time when British practiced the strategy of divide and rule. So I want to sort of stop myself here and just want you to notice a few things. Notice that they're not talking generally about the social issue. They're staying with Gandhi. So that stuff's all in purple. to show how that's all focused in on the element that I promised my reader I was going to write about. It's about the boycott and maintaining my points, right? So economic independence is one of the key points of my analytical point. So to decrease dependency, make people more creative, inspiring creativity, maintaining that language throughout my analysis here. So it's structured clearly. The stuff that's in green here is obviously the quote from an outside source. And while you don't have to have a quote from an outside source in every support paragraph, we do need to have 3 quotes from outside sources in our WD2. One of them needs to be an academic source. You want to bring those quotes in after you've done some analysis, right? It's better to bring those quotes in later in the process of a support paragraph. That way the quote serves to back your ideas up, right? So I don't want to start with the Jones quote, right after my subclaim, or even at the start of the paragraph, because that means Jones is driving the analysis, right? They're the one who gets the first word. You don't want that. You want the first word. That's what the subclaim is all about. Then you go in and you analyze a little bit, and then you bring in the quote to back up your point. So let me continue. And notice how we're sticking to the sort of the logic of the subclaim here. A crucial part of this boycott was Gandhi's portable spinning wheel that encouraged others to creatively produce their own textiles, the quality of which is still known and respected today and a primary source of India's economic independence. Further, when Gandhi stepped out in traditional Indian clothes with a wooden stick in his hand for support and no weapon, people saw the sense of pride in him to be Swadeshi, a sense that made them feel that he was their own, and a sense of determination and hunger in his eyes for India's freedom. So most likely when it comes to the central claim, that's why you have the red at the bottom here, India's freedom, this notion of determination, those are probably things that are the key ideas of the actual central claim statement, right? And so we're going to talk about central claims right now. But the reason why you connect back to the central claim statement at the end of a support paragraph is it serves 2 things. One, it connects the analysis to the larger argument. Obviously, your subclaims are more specific than, I don't want to say the same thing as my central claim with every subclaim, because I want to have distinct ideas as I go from subclaim to subclaim or support paragraph to support paragraph. However, I do want to show how all these things do relate to the larger idea of my argument. So that's why you capture at the end of a support paragraph, you connect the analysis back to, so they bring up the Swadeshi, they bring up the boycott, they bring up this determination, and then they connect to this larger sense of determination and freedom. The other thing it does is it tells your reader, since they're going to hear the echo of the central claim at the end of the support paragraph, and since they know it's the end of the paragraph, it's going to serve as a transition. So you're essentially tying up that, well, I don't want to say loose end, but you're tying up that analysis saying, okay, so this is how it relates to the central claim, and then we'll move on to a new idea. So those are the 2 purposes of doing that at the end of a support paragraph. Now that said, let's take a look at central claims in terms of our Iconoclast essay. So let me bring back that kind of mapping that we did, I think, in the very first slide, right? The argument is what you see as the larger significance of this impact for society, the impact that is of your Iconoclast, and the larger significance. So the central claim statement is really addressing that. Now, if you remember from last module, there's a little bit more to the central claim than just the larger significance. So again, let me move. I'm not sure if this is showing up on the actual recording, but I'm just moving my face out of the way because it's blocking the slide. What do you see as the most prominent impact of your Iconoclast on the social issues? So these are I'm going to put up 3 questions here that give us a sense of what we want to do with our central claim statement. I think maybe answering these questions, like I would answer these questions for myself and how many ever sentences it takes. And then I can start to develop my central claim based upon that. So what do you see as the most prominent impact of your Iconoclast on the social issues? Okay, sorry. What do you see as the overall consequence of this impact for the social issues? What does it get us to understand or to do? Or like I said, what is it getting the people, of who were the most important people affected or concerned to understand or to do? So like we said, in the case of the Gandhi situation, we're talking about what did it get the people of India to do or to understand, right? And that, notice that it says overall consequence, right? And what that means is that, yeah, essentially I'm saying sort of like what might be a couple of key words that sort of capture what I see as the overall consequence of the impact the iconoclast is having. And lastly, why is this significant in regards to the social issue? This is that larger sort of social significance, right? So those, that impact, consequence of it, and the significance of it, those things should be relatively familiar. Yes, with the non-traditional narrative, it was more about like, what do you feel is the message of the narrative about the social issue? What was the consequence of that message, and what was the larger significance of it? So here we're talking about the impact of an iconoclast as kind of the message, if you will, in this case. So, but the rest of it should be fairly familiar. So let's take a look at an example here. And I'm just going to minimize my head to get it out of the way. So again, here's the sort of central claim statement that came from the Gandhi essay. Now, again, keep in mind that this is a central claim that wasn't sort of written in one shot. This is a central claim that was developed through multiple drafts, and I think it was not only sort of revised from a workshop draft to a revised draft, but it was also part of a final portfolio where they had to revise their revised draft. In many cases, this is a work that took a lot of time. It didn't just come out like this in one shot. But I wanted to sort of break it down piece by piece so you can get a sense of impact, consequence, significance, and how it can be developed in the context of this particular paper on an iconoclast. So Gandhi, today known as the father of India, unforgettably unified a divided and fractured nation, rendered second class by British rule, right? So there's the impact, right? So Gandhi, of course, we're talking about an iconoclast figure from the past. So they unforgettably unified and divided a fractured nation, right? Then, in terms of the consequence, they bring up Gandhi's influence inspired Indians to fight for their own independence and freedom. So there's that notion of freedom. Remember we said in the previous slide that it was probably connecting to some sort of sense of the central claim. There's that key term of freedom. So Gandhi's influence inspired Indians to fight for their own independence and freedom. So that was the consequence of the impact that Gandhi had in terms of this person's argument. And then lastly, serving as an example to this day of how nonviolence and determination are the essential ingredients for effective social change. There's that key term, determination, that was also at the end of the last support paragraph. So that's where they're sort of echoing the central claim to close out that analysis paragraph that we saw in the previous slide. But here we're getting a sense of that larger significance, right? What did it do? It shows the kind of nonviolence, and determination that are the essential ingredients for effective social change. So I have a feeling that what this argument, what the social issue is here is really about social change and activism and how to effectively achieve that, right? So in some sense, that's the larger social issue that they're talking about Gandhi with. So what was Gandhi's impact upon how social change happens? Well, this person is arguing that Gandhi teaches us that nonviolence and determination are the key aspects of that, right? That's the sort of big takeaway. That's the larger lesson. Of course, that's the thing that I'm going to end up developing mostly in my conclusion, right? That larger significance is the thing that I sort of have the sort of big, that'll be the big takeaway of my essay, the close of my essay. Of course, we're not worried about conclusions for this WD2. Really, this WD2 is about getting that introduction, some sense of a central claim, and some sense at least of one or two subclaim driven support paragraphs. So here, just to wrap up, you see that we have the sense of the impact. What was the impact of Gandhi? Well, unified a divided and fractured nation. What was the consequence of that? Inspired Indians to fight for their own independence and freedom. And then what's the larger significance of this? Well, it teaches us how nonviolence and determination are the essential ingredients for effective social change. Most likely in your workshop draft, you're not going to have a fully formed central claim statement yet. Again, like I said, these are things that are built towards, particularly in terms of the larger significance of the thing. But you definitely want a sense of what you think is the impact and try and develop a sense of what you think the consequence of that impact is of your iconoclast. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and just want to say uh, good luck with the workshop draft of SA2. Looking forward to getting into a new reading into a whole, and we're all going to be workshopping these essays again, just like we did with our WD1s. So looking forward to those exchanges and those conversations and helping one another continue to develop our understanding of our, of central claim development, organization, analysis, clarity of prose, subclaims, and the like. All right, everybody, until next time, thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon. Take care.